By special request from one of you guys, I decided to go back and revisit the first Creed from 2015, starring Michael B. Jordan, Sylvester Stallone, Tessa Thompson, amongst others, and directed by the one and only Ryan Coogler, the man behind Fruitvale Station and Black Panther, as well as Wakanda Forever, just remember that one. Now, the reason I'm doing this is particularly in light of the recent passing of Carl Weathers, who was known as Apollo Creed, and I'll be honest, it was a little hard at first to consider going back to this, knowing how much of an impact he's had on the Rocky series and as well as me and amongst other people. And due to the character's death in the fourth Rocky film, he's obviously not in here except for archive footage. But his impact is clearly felt throughout the entire thing. So in honor of the late Carl Weathers, wherever he may be on the other side, I've decided to do this for him. After the Rocky series concluded with Rocky VI, they announced the first Creed movie. And I remember seeing the trailers for it at the time, and I thought, oh, really? Why are we going back to this? It ended so well with the last Rocky movie. Just don't even touch it. Seeing that Stallone was going to come back, I thought it was just going to be a very hollow and soulless type of follow-up to the series. But then as the reviews came out at the time, everybody was praising it. Naturally, my interest was piqued. And needless to say, after the movie ended, I walked out with a feeling of amazement. This is probably the best film since the original film from 1976, and this came out 39 years after that. This was among the first of the set of legacy sequels that we've gotten in the last nearly 10 years, because not too long after this we had Force Awakens, and then a few years after we had No Way Home, then Top Gun Maverick. You get the idea. If I had to rank this in the category of legacy sequels, this might actually be the best one in that category. It has a really good blend, in my estimation, of fan service and new stuff to go along with it. So the film opens up in 1998 in a juvenile detention center with a young boy getting into a fight with a fellow inmate. And he gets a visit from this woman who offers to take him in. And it's revealed that this boy is the son of Apollo Creed, and that the woman who's coming to see him is Apollo Creed's widow. This young boy named Donnie Johnson been bounced around a bunch of different foster homes, never really knowing who his father was. And due to the fact of not having a father in his life, he feels very bitter about the way his life has been going. But then as it's revealed in the movie, he's actually the product of an extramarital affair that Apollo had before he died in the ring. Then the film jumps to 17 years later in 2015. Donnie's living in LA, working for some financial company out in Hollywood, but he also does some side boxing down in Mexico in order to fulfill his need to be a fighter. Ultimately, he decides that his high-powered life is not really what he's looking for, so he quits his job and decides to move to Philly to look for Rocky Balboa to help him train as a fighter. In their own ways, they're all telling him, dude, you don't have to do this. Similar to your father, this is not going to end well. Yet he remains determined in order to fulfill what he feels is his calling. Come to think of it, it kind of reminds me of what Hermione said to Harry in the first Harry Potter film when he's placed on the Quidditch team for Gryffindor, and he wonders, what if I make a fool of myself? And Hermione says, you won't. It's in your blood. I think Donnie is in a similar predicament here. He does feel like he's going to be viewed as some kind of a fraud due to him being the descendant of Apollo Creed, and he goes by the last name Johnson, which is his birth mother's name, not wanting all that attention of being the son of Apollo. So he goes to Philly and finds Rocky at his restaurant, and I absolutely love the reintroduction of Rocky. When I saw this back in 2015, when he said this,
how you doing?
I just had a big smile on my face. It was like saying, hey, how you doing, old friend? And Donnie reveals that he is Apollo's son by talking about certain details that only he, Rocky, would know. And he immediately says, no, I don't want to be part of this. I left the fight a long time ago. But yet throughout the movie, he's still determined to have Rocky be his trainer, because he tried to do the same thing with Duke's son out in LA, and it obviously wasn't going to work out. And since Rocky knew Apollo, he knew what kind of fighting methods that he was using, and he figured that if he wants to be the best, he's got to learn from the best. It takes a little while for Rocky to come around to it, but eventually he does end up taking the offer. Got a humorous moment or two in there as well, especially with the iCloud joke.
What if you lose that there, it breaks?
It's already up in the cloud.
What cloud? What cloud?
There is a resemblance. Continuing the typical tropes that we see in a boxing movie, we get a series of training montages. I think it's about maybe 3 that show up in here. Starting out at Mickey's old gym where Rocky trained a long time ago, teaching him a lot of the old methods that he was taught as well, including chasing the chicken. And I gotta tell you, even now, back when I watched this, I literally almost screeched at the top of my lungs with laughter in the theater. I thought, oh God. And even Rocky uses Mickey's words of women weaken legs. Some things never change. Yeah, but I really like this girl, you know? Well, let her train you. Okay, no more fooling around. On top of that, this movie continues the trend that the last film did, Rocky VI, where it has real-life boxers being the opponents of the main protagonist, saving the filmmakers trouble of teaching an actor how to box, which I guess in a way is much more beneficial and will save you a lot of time, because the boxer's already in shape and you don't need to go through all those rigorous training days. The other side of that can work just fine, and Mark Wahlberg was able to do it with The Fighter. But I think, in the long run, this approach was probably the better idea. And the punches do feel real. When they hit, they hit. Especially when you see Donnie's eye close in the climactic fight. But, well, I'm getting ahead of myself here. But certain fighters that Donnie goes up against, like Danny Wheeler, is real-life boxer Andre Ward. Leo the Lion Sparino is played by real-life boxer Gabriel Rosado. And Pretty Ricky Conlon is played by Tony Bellew, who's a real-life boxer from Liverpool, England, just like his counterpart. And real-life cutman Jacob Stitch Duran, who was in the 6 Rocky movie, shows up in here too, as Donnie's cutman. And while rewatching this movie, I caught on to the fact that Ricky Conlon's trainer, played by Graham McTavish, he co-starred with Stallone in the 4th Rambo movie a long time ago. And he was also the main antagonist of Uncharted 2, Zoran Lazarevic. I mean, the voice is a pretty dead giveaway, except without the Eastern European dialect. While rewatching him, I thought, oh, when's Nolan North gonna show up? It appears you have nothing left to bargain with, Mr. Drake. Now, having mentioned the fights, Ryan Coogler presents a set of one-shot takes throughout this movie. The first being the one that we see Donnie getting in the fight in Juvenile Hall. The second one that I can recall off the top of my head is when he fights Leo in the ring. This one continuous shot, I kid you not, I think it must have gone on for at least 4 minutes. Maybe I'm wrong. Compared to back when I first saw this, and even now, I get the same feeling of, this is not ending. And I don't really think Ryan Coogler's trying to thump his chest at people who use handheld or quick editing to cover up poor stunt work. Because sometimes that does work in a film's favor, but a lot of times it doesn't really go so well. That's a whole nother discussion. In this case, this was done with skill. And I think it's really meant to make you feel like you're watching a fight in real time. Not to mention that Coogler presents a really good sense of realism to this movie. The cinematographer, Maurice Alberti, I hope I said that correctly, along with Ryan Coogler's direction, provides a really good sense of grit throughout this movie. Particularly in certain shots when we're in the city of Philly. It makes you, the viewer, feel like you're actually smelling or feeling the sweat coming off of the streets. Having been to Philly many, many times, I can tell you that this movie is probably the best portrayal aesthetically to portray the city in real life. Then there's a musical score by Ludwig Göransson. When you follow up on somebody like Bill Conti's iconic Gonna Fly Now theme, you better bring your A game. It's like following up on John Williams' iconic Superman score. Whenever someone does a musical score for a Superman movie going forward, that's going to be a big shadow to live in. And here I think Ludwig Göransson manages to make it his own, but also pays tribute to the original theme in the final training montage when we see Donnie running through the streets right outside of his new training gym. More or less like an echo of what we heard many years prior, but yet it still feels faithful to the spirit of the Rocky franchise. But really at the core of this movie, it's about what the characters are experiencing at this current stage in their lives. Donnie ends up dating his neighbor Bianca, who's a professional singer in Philly, and is experiencing a sense of hearing loss progressively. The romance between the two is pretty basic and standard. I'm not really that wowed by it, but at the same time, I'm not really that offended by it either. I think it serves its purpose. It gets the job done. And she actually provides some needed wisdom that Donnie needs to hear when eventually the secret gets out that he actually is Apollo's son. She tells him that, look, you are Apollo Creed's son. You can't escape that. But don't try to be your father. Be your own person, which is what he ultimately wanted to do, building upon what came before and making his own legacy. But things start to get real when it's revealed that Rocky has non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And without treatment, he won't be able to survive. Due to him still reeling from the death of his wife, who died of ovarian cancer, he decides not to go through with the treatment, thinking that if it didn't work for her, it's not going to work for him. When Donnie finds out about this, it causes a lot of friction between the two when Rocky refuses to get the treatment. And I've had a lot of time to process what exactly the main theme is of this movie. Because, you know, with certain movies, you have to watch a certain amount of times and you have to listen to what other people take away from it in order to fully grasp what said artist is trying to convey. I think Donnie and Rocky both feel like they're not enough at this point in their lives. Obviously, they're both at different stages in their lives, but both feel like they're not enough. Donnie doesn't have his real father in his life. Rocky's son has moved on. His wife is dead. Paulie has passed on. He doesn't really feel like he has anything left to live for, but ultimately, they're both what each other need. Rocky acts as a father figure to Donnie, which is what he desperately needs in his life. And Donnie, in a way, is like the son that Rocky really wanted to have in his son, Rocky Jr. He tells Rocky, if I'm gonna fight, then you're gonna fight this thing. I'm not gonna do this while you just sit there and die on me. Personally, I think it's a really really good message to take away from it. No matter what kind of hand you've been dealt in your life, your past baggage, whatever that might be, doesn't define who you are as a person, and you still can find something worth living for. As Joel once said to Ellie in The Last of Us, you keep finding something to fight for. Also, I need to mention, Stallone's performance as Rocky Balboa might actually be the best that he's been as the character probably since the 6th Rocky film. The way he responds to his cancer diagnosis, it feels very real, and he's able to convey the sense of despair and fear without feeling like he's begging the audience for sympathy. It even got to the point where he was nominated for Best Supporting Actor at the Oscars later that year, even winning a Golden Globe for Best Supporting Actor. The words immense satisfaction don't quite cover it for me. So eventually they managed to go to Liverpool to carry out the fight against Ricky Conlan, bringing back Max Kellerman as one of the HBO commentators. He's a little more bearable in this one, but I still can't get over the fact that they had a Giants fan in here worshipping Rocky Balboa, which, you know what, compared to Skip Bayless writing off Rocky in the last Rocky movie, this might actually be the most bearable thing I can swallow. Yeah, I'm just gonna leave it at that. With all the character stuff that has been building up prior to this fight, this match between Conlan and Creed is probably the most riveting any fight has been in the Rocky series, maybe even since in the 2nd or 3rd Rocky film. Rocky 6 has a great fight between him and Mason the Lion Dixon. Of course, I love the original fight between Balboa and Creed. My personal favorite might be the rematch in the 2nd film, but this one's on a totally different level. Starts out in the first round not really getting too many hits in, but then he manages to clock Conlan right in the face, and then there's no going back. And at one point, Donnie gets knocked out cold and has a bunch of flashes of his time with Bianca, meeting his mother, seeing Rocky go through his cancer battle, and then the last image we see is old footage of Apollo from his first fight with Rocky, waking Donnie up like he's a man possessed. But there's a crucial moment that happens right before the final round. When Rocky says that he's gonna stop the fight, Donnie stops him by saying,
I gotta prove it.
Prove what?
I'm not a mistake.
I'll be honest, the first time I saw this, I was caught somewhat off guard. But knowing what exactly his full story is, being the bastard child of Apollo Creed, this actually hits home in so many ways. And it plays into the theme of how he doesn't feel like he's enough, that he'll just be viewed as some kind of a poser, since he's not exactly the son of both Apollo and his actual wife. But he has the heart that's needed for a fighter, and he's a living embodiment of Apollo Creed, like Max Kellerman points out at the end of the fight. And therefore, earning Conlan's respect, even though he doesn't actually win the fight, I think it's a lot more impactful. Because even the crowd that's pretty biased towards Ricky Conlan, they recognize that Donnie is something special, and he's gonna go a long way in the boxing world. This guy, he's helping me fight a few things too, so I appreciate it, I really do. And it would behoove me not to mention at least once in this review, the final image or scene when they're walking up the famous Rocky steps of the Museum of Art in Philly, and we get that really beautiful image of downtown Philly from the top of the steps. I'm not from Philly. I was never born and raised there. But as I said earlier, I've been there numerous times. And being a Philly sports fan, if you couldn't tell by the shirt, I feel a special connection to that city. There's no other city like it. Except for maybe New York City. I don't want to ruffle any feathers on that debate anyway. That's one of the best views I think you'll ever lay eyes on. If any one of you has never been to Philly, if you manage to make your way there somehow, go to the top of those stairs. You'll know exactly what I mean when you see it. Oh my god, I completely forgot a couple of things. The way the original theme cues up right when the final round begins, and Donnie and Ricky both get up and they're ready to go at each other, never ceases to get my blood pumping. This, among many other examples that I may or may not have alluded to throughout this review, is a proper way to balance old and new. Paying respect to what came before, but also embracing a new identity. As for any problems, it only comes down to one thing. There's this one character played by Richie Costi, who is the childhood friend of Rocky Balboa, who's Leo Sparino's father. And then he finds out that Donnie is Apollo Creed's son, and we could pretty much guess where it's going, that he eventually leaks it to the press that this kid is actually Apollo's son. But we never see this character show up again. It just kind of gets forgotten about. And even after 2 more movies, it's still never addressed. I would have liked at least some closure with that. All that aside though, this movie is really something special, and I think if you're a Rocky fan or if you're a fan of boxing films, this is a must-see for anybody who's into it. And having gotten 3 movies into the Creed trilogy, this was a great start. And I also have to say, Michael B. Jordan as Adonis Creed, well done, man. And having seen him in the later 2 Creed films, this guy is most definitely going places. And whatever he decides to do next, I will be down for seeing it. So those are my thoughts on Creed. Thank you guys so much for watching. Comment below and tell me what your thoughts are on this movie if you've seen it. Stay tuned for more videos coming up soon. And as always, see you in the next one. And also, keep punching.